Good evening. I am very pleased to welcome you to the Pilecki-Institut. The title of tonight's event is A Question of Life and Death, the failure of the future, no, not failure, future, the future of Ukraine, Poland and Germany. This is the very existential title. My name is Mateusz Fałkowski and I am deputy head of the Institute. And it's no coincidence that we a Polish institute dedicated to the history of 20th century, reacted strongly to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Dealing with the Second World War, the German and Soviet occupation of Poland, and the memory of that time has made us sensitive to the question of how we respond to the Russian-Ukrainian war, how we perceive it, and how we will remember it in the future. It's also no coincidence that we, the Polish institution in Berlin, work closely with the Ukrainian diaspora organization WICE. Irina Shulkina from WICE will then moderate a discussion between Mr. Roderick Kiesewetter, member of the Bundestag, Daniel Szeligowski from the Polish Institute of International Affairs, and Dominika Łuczkiewicz from the Pilecki-Institut. So I would like to warmly welcome everyone. Patrycja Grzebek will be with us online. The occasion for this meeting is the 4th anniversary of the war and our need to make a tribute we wish to pay to Ukrainian soldiers and civilians. However, there are also several very important publications, also as an impulse to our tonight's meeting. And we would like to encourage you to read it. Some of them are available for download using a QR code, and you can look at this and this all the QR codes to download it if you want. And these books are, among other things, this is the book edited by Dominika Łuczkiewicz and Patrycja Grzebek, The Russian-Ukrainian Conflict and War Crimes, Challenges for Documentation and International Prosecution. There are two reports by Daniel Szeligowski about under the title Defining Ukrainians' Victory, and the other one co-authored by Daniel Szeligowski, so the report on Polish help, Polish aid to Ukraine after 2022. And there are also, I would like to recommend you to read it and to look at it, also several reports, 3 reports already translated into English, German, and Ukrainian. So the reports produced by our own Lemkin Center, the initiative of the Pilecki-Institut, launched directly by after the full-scale invasion. And we started at that time to collect data, collect testimonies of Russian crimes. And already in the meantime, there are 3 reports made. So one is about crimes against children committed by Russian troops. Another one is about sexual violence. And the third one is under the title, We Don't Attack Civilians, the Green Corridor in Lepivka as a trap set by the Russian occupying forces. And all these reports are available also online. And you can look at this. And there's also another book. It's a book by Mr. Roderick Kiesewetter, What Do We Want, What Can We Do, in German. Germany's roles in the global power shift, and this book is possible to buy it at the address. And now I would like to give the microphone to Irina. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mateusz. Good evening, everyone. My name is Irina Shulikin. I'm CEO of WICE FV. It's a great honor for me to moderate tonight's discussion, A Question of Life and Death, the Future of Ukraine, Poland, and Germany. Before we begin, I would like to sincerely thank to Pilecki-Institut for organizing this important event and for creating a space for us and for serious reflection and discuss the question of the future of Europe. Today we meet in a shadow of a date that changed Europe forever. 24th February 2022, the beginning of Russian full-scale invasion in Ukraine. But this war is not only about Ukraine. In fact, Russia's war is a direct challenge to the European security order, to the principles of international law and democracy itself that were built after Second World War to prevent wars, aggression, and genocide. This principle did not emerge by chance. They were shaped by individuals such as Hersch Lauerpacht and Raphael Lemkin, jurists who laid the foundation of modern international law and the concept of genocide. They were also shaped by institutions such as United Nations War Crimes Commission, by the work of those who documented crimes during the darkest moments of war. Because justice begins with documentation, and history teaches us something very simple. Unpunished crimes tend to repeat themselves. Today, as Russia continues its war of aggression, we are once again confronted with the questions whether international system built after 1945 can truly defend itself. At the same time, the geopolitical context is changing. The transatlantic relationship is under the strain. The United States is reconsidering its global role, and Europe faces a difficult question. Is it ready to stand its ground? And to help us to navigate these complex issues, we are joined by an excellent panel of experts. Let me briefly introduce our panelists. Again, Rodrich Kiesewetter, member of German Bundestag from CDU, former Bundeswehr officer and one of Germany's most outspoken voices advocating stronger European security policy and sustained Ukrainian support. Your applause, please. Then we have Daniel Szeligowski, foreign policy analyst at the Polish Institute of International Affairs and one of Poland's leading experts on Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and regional security. Dominika Łuczkiewicz, lawyer and historian at the Pilecki-Institut, specialist in transitional justice and legal history. And online we'll be joined by Patrycja Grzebek, professor of international law at University of Warsaw, OSCE expert and specialist in international humanitarian and criminal law. Dear friends, before we are starting our discussion, we are having an input from our speakers who will present their works, their books and publications. And we will start now with Mr. Kiesewetter.
Thank you very much indeed for the kind introduction. Dear panelists, dear Pilecki-Institut, dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm really grateful to the Pilecki-Institut having this and coordinated with Vice this evening today. I will not advertise my book. I would like to speak as a parliamentarian to you and would like to mention some really important issues in my view and also in the view of many parliamentarians. This year 26, Ukraine is emerging from one of the harshest winters in the last decade, not only regarding the degrees, but also regarding the threat, the destruction, the violence. However, we should not let ourselves distract by that what now is happening in Iran. It's the third time since the 7th of October that our awareness is distracted and shifted to the Near Middle East. On the 7th of October, during the 12 Days War, and now. And we must see that Iran is one of the largest supporters of Russia in this fight against Ukraine. They are the originators of the Iran drones.
and they are those who have learned a lot for their own missile program from this ugly Russian war of destruction against Ukraine. So let's not distract, and I will focus on Ukraine. Ukraine is now security provider for us. Look to the Copenhagen summit last year, where Ukraine provided an umbrella against the drone threats from Russian ships. Second, Ukraine is withstanding without further support from European countries and being faced with a reduction of the United States from 24 to 25 by 99%. The military support of the United States for Ukraine diminished from $36 billion to only $400 million. So this is the 99% shrink. The Americans have changed their priorities. In their national security strategy from December and in their national defense strategy from January this year, the United States have stated the following: 4 priorities. The first priority is the United States itself. The second priority is the Indo-Pacific. The third priority, they have chosen areas of their own interest and operations of specific interest. Look to Venezuela, look to Greenland, look to the near Middle East. And on the fourth priority, it's Europe. And in their national defense strategy, they have stated that the conventional defense of Europe is up to Europe. And the now acting Undersecretary of Defense, Albert Colby, told me more than a year ago, we Americans won't risk our own security for the sake of East Estonia. He stated, it's up to you. And the key question is, how reliable is the security guarantee of the United States? So being priority 4, we must change our own priorities so that our first priority is the future of Ukraine in its legal borders, in the European Union, and perhaps in the European NATO. The attractivity of Article 5 was the nuclear umbrella of the United States. I do not want to question that, but I believe with regard to conventional defense, Article 42.7 of the EU Treaty is much more reliable because it calls to the member states to be ready with everything they have. Now we are in a stalemate in the European Union. We see how Hungary and Slovak Republic are following Russian narratives. However, we have some means. But the key country who has to change its own attitude is not Poland, are not the Nordic and Baltic states, is not the United Kingdom. The key country who has to change its attitude is Germany. Why? Our narrative from 45 to today was never war again, never National Socialism again. And I say this also in the awareness of Pilecki, who sacrificed himself not only in a concentration camp, but later on being part of communist accusations, and he lost his life for his brave behavior, for his diligence, for the freedom of Poland. So the lesson learned of the German neighbor states, those states who were confronted with German cruelties and German military terror, their lesson learned was not never war again, never fascism again. Their lesson learned was never defenseless again. And the jump in the mindset, the change in the strategic culture of Germany must be, if we want to avoid war and want to say never war again, we never must be defenseless again. Never defenseless again together. And it is Germany which has a unique economy which is able to help others to reinvigorate. And we really should give up some restraints and restrictions. And I would like to mention some. The German public is quite comfortable with our politics because they are told Germany is the strongest supporter of Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, in true figures, that's not wrong. But measured with the GDP, Germany is on place 12 or 14, depending on the way how you measure it. On place 1 is Denmark, followed by the 3 Baltic states and Poland. Even the UK is investing 3 times more compared to the GDP than Germany. We invest in the military support of Ukraine the same as we invest in mothers' retirement payment or in diesel subsidies, 0.2% of our GDP. Whereas we invest nearly 3 times more to help the Ukrainian refugees in Germany. So it costs about 50 euros a year per person in Germany, the military support of Ukraine, and the support of Ukrainian refugees costs about 200 euros per person a year. So if we reverse it and bring the Ukrainian refugees to work, which is possible if we give up our skepticism to their degrees, what other countries also did, like the Netherlands, where 70% of the Ukrainian refugees are at work. It is also a question of dignity. Then I would like to say we could afford this. We need to do this. And therefore, it is of utmost importance for also our neighbors, but also for us Germans, to understand that war today is not only the war with military means at the eastern border, not very successful from Russia. It is a threefolded war. It's the military war and the preparation for a larger war after this war, where Russia is investing 40% of their economy as a wartime economy in material, in weapons, and in soldiers who are not employed in Ukraine. The second field of war is the so-called civilian warfare, sabotage, destruction of civilian infrastructure, which is severely damaging the cohesion of the Ukrainian society by destroying nearly every electricity power station, nearly every, trying to cause mass migration and so on. And the third, the Germans are very receptive, it's fake news. And it is our understanding of the freedom of speech that everything which is uttered may be valid. Yes, it may be valid, but it must withstand criticism. And freedom of speech does not mean you must not criticize it. And therefore we have to debunk wrong narratives in the sense of Hannah Arendt. My plea in the end, because we are all looking forward to those who have written these modern books and to our debate, in the end, yes, let's be optimistic. But let's also enfold civil courage in our civil societies, not waiting that others are applauding, but going ahead and making us very clear it's up to Germany to change it. And in Germany, the situation must change. We must say thank you to our neighbors who invest much more in view of the GDP. Thank you also to the Baltic states who have received also a German brigade. And our security is the security of Lithuania, and Lithuanian security is German security. And as regards Poland, I wished, and therefore I would also, with that I would like to conclude, I wished more German decency. I wished more preparedness to understand what we have damaged in the souls and minds also in the grandchildren of those who were forced to work. And it is not a sign of, I would like to say, greatness when Germany is waiting and waiting and waiting and not trying to help at least the families who were dependent from the fates of their ancestors who were killed in forced work, or were killed in concentration camps, or were killed simply because they were Polish people. So this dignity is important. And also to make very clear to those forces in Germany who could believe in a land swap between Ukraine and Poland and then the country west of Poland, give it up. The borders should refer to 1990, to the Charter of Paris. So free choice of alliances and no violation of our borders and acceptance of our past. And to marry and to find a kind of marriage of nie wieder Krieg und nie wieder verteidigungs- und wehrlos. Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Guten Abend. Dobry wieczór всім, якщо українські колеги. I was invited here because I am a professional pessimist. So this time I wanted to say something optimistic to you. And the first point I want to raise loud and clear. I was asked to tell you a few things about Poland, Ukraine, and Germany, but I really want to start with Russia. I want to tell you that Russia is not winning this war, no matter what the people tell you, and no matter what you see in the social media, just very quickly. Ukraine didn't give in, no matter what the Russians are telling you. And Zelensky didn't give in, although Putin wanted him to give in when Zelensky became a president. And he was a new president. By 2022, Putin had actually exhausted all the options to subjugate Ukraine. That he attacked Ukraine wasn't really a surprise. He wanted to subjugate Ukraine politically. He used corruption. He used energy pressure. He used economic pressure. He meddled in Ukrainian internal affairs, but he has always failed. And that is my point. He wanted to subjugate Ukraine, and he has failed, and he has failed spectacularly, and he has failed across the board. What did Putin really want in 2022, if we take a step back and have a broader perspective? He wanted to get rid of President Zelensky, and he has failed to do so. He wanted to deprive Ukraine of the means to defend itself, and he has failed to do so. He wanted to change Ukraine's foreign policy orientation, and he has failed to do so. He wanted to grab part of Ukraine's territory and have it internationally recognized, and he also failed to do so. No matter what he's telling you, he has spectacularly failed in Ukraine, and for Russia, for now, hopefully, this has been one big, spectacular strategic failure. And as we speak, what we are actually seeing is trying Putin to reverse the whole narrative and to convince the international public opinion that he is winning. He is not winning in Ukraine. Now, because Russia is not winning in Ukraine, this leaves us with rather simple but consequential choice. We may turn on the complacency mode, everything's gonna be okay, we may go home and sleep peacefully. Or we may try to bring about the Ukrainian victory. And that is my second thing. That's the second point that I wanna say loud and clear. But Russian strategic failure in Ukraine does not automatically mean that Ukraine will win this war. We still have a lot to do. Putin may have failed in Ukraine spectacularly, but he has always a plan B. If you remember this ridiculously long table, on this long table there is a plan B, which means to destroy Ukraine as a country, to make it a place that is no longer livable for the Ukrainians. To turn Ukraine into ashes. That's what we are seeing now with these airstrikes and attacks on the Ukrainian population. So the question is, what constitutes Ukraine's victory for now? This is not some academic discussion. This is very pragmatic political discussion. Mr. Kyiv would not be offended if I say that politicians are always very selfish people and they want to invest their political capital in the things that they do consider worthy their investment, that they do consider as victory, because no politician wants to be associated with failure. And because of that, it means it has a lot of significance how we frame the things, how we frame victory in Ukraine and how we frame failure in Ukraine. First, bad news is that there will never be one single definition of victory in Ukraine, because the war, as you remember, Clausewitz was a German after all, he told you that war is extension of the politics. Then victory in war is also political, which means that this is always a subjective thing. People always have different opinions on that. Good news is that I have my own opinion on that, and I pen a report on Ukrainian victory, which you may use. You may use a QR code and you may download it, but I will tell you what it is. First, because we assume, and I assume, that Russia wants to destroy Ukraine as a country to live, as a statehood that we have. Then, if we take a vice versa approach, Ukrainian success is to preserve strong, secure, and Ukrainian statehood, but because this is what Putin wants to destroy. And I think each of these three elements are absolutely crucial. They are relevant. Strong Ukraine that would maintain internal order, independent Ukraine that retains freedom from Russia over its domestic and foreign policy choices, and secure Ukraine that is able to defend itself from Russia now and in the future. Of course, that kind of political objective has to be underpinned by a military victory. And as analyst, I would tell you there are more or less three options how to do that. The first one is we may bring Russia to the negotiating table. We did that with little success, to be honest. The second option is to bring about the impasse on the front line. We have to do much more. The Ukrainians have to do much more, but it is possible. And the third option is internal change or undermining the stability of the Russian regime, which I think is also possible, but let's say not everyone wants to see it. The bottom line is that there is a path for Ukraine's victory, but we have to do much more. But Russia and Putin, they have invested so heavily in this war that even though we may bring about an impasse, even though Russia would objectively not be able to conquer Ukraine and to subjugate Ukraine, they may never reckon with reality. So, regrettably, the set objective situation is that even though Putin cannot win this war, he may equally continue this war till the end because he has invested so much. He has refused so many offers, he has refused so many face-saving options, he is simply not interested in any face-saving option, and he will not be interested. But the good news here is that there is a huge gap between what Putin wants and what Putin can achieve. I mean, physically, what he can achieve. He may not change his war objectives against Ukraine, but he may not be able to destroy Ukraine. He may not be able to conquer Ukraine physically by resorting to war. And this is sort of fury victory that, for example, put forward General Zaluzhny, once a commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces and now an ambassador to the United Kingdom, says Ukrainian victory is Russian inability to impose its will on Ukraine by force. So if you look at it, this is sort of a functional approach to the victory, not necessarily calculated in terms of territory. This brings me to the third and final point, which you may not like, but I have to tell you that. Peace may never come for Ukraine at all. And we have to be prepared for that scenario. We have to be prepared for a scenario of prolonged, long prolonged war that would never end. Call it hybrid peace, if you want. We may have yet another round of pointless talks with Russia, but very little comes out of it. Russians are playing for time. Russians are believing that the US would give in, that they can outweigh Ukraine, that they can outweigh us, that they can outweigh the United States. And at the end of the day, they would win this war. They still believe they can win this war. And to be honest, there is a degree of logic to that. If we believe that we may go home, everything is gonna be okay, Putin will be okay as well. I presented you with these three options before, like bringing Russia to the negotiating table, bringing about an impasse on the front line, or undermining the stability of the Russian regime. Regrettably, the second one, so creating an impasse and having an inconsequential or a war that is not really settled, that the war that does not end with any settlement, this may be the most probable scenario for now. But this also means that the war in future will not be shaped by single victories on the front line, but actually will be shaped by political unity, by social cohesion, by social approval to continue assistance to Ukraine, by our own physical capabilities, capacity to produce weapons and to send them to Ukraine as well. And if this is true, this means that this is going to be a governance problem for us, not only political problem, not only military problem. So simply speaking, if we plan for short war, which we may, then eventually we'll underdeliver. But it's just one part of the story, just one side of the coin, if you wish. It's not enough to say that Ukrainians are resilient. They are resilient as hell. They are. You just saw them through the winter. But that's not enough. Just say that they will carry on. They're going to be fine. Prolonging any war comes at a cost. I mean, It comes at cost for Russia for sure. It comes at cost for us, but it comes at cost for those for whom it is a question of war and death. So it comes at cost for Ukraine and for the Ukrainians. And they are bearing the cost for this war. So hiding behind Ukraine's back would not suffice. I mean, it may help us sleep better, but at the end of the day, this is not the way that we should be following. So as long as Russia retains the capabilities to attack Ukraine, unfortunately, the likely scenario is that they will continue to attack Ukraine, which leaves us with one option, actually to deprive Russia of the physical means to continue the war. And there are very concrete measures. The so-called, depriving Russia of production capabilities, supply chains, drones, shadow fleet, whatever brings finance to the Russian budget, this is something that should be our own target. I promise you to raise the 3 points, but I really wanted to keep my promise. But I want to, at the very end, I want to leave you with one uncomfortable question. This is like the question that I would not provide an answer to, but intentionally. There is this story, people say that this is existential for Putin. The war is existential for Putin. But what it means that war is existential for Putin. If this is existential for Putin, then it means that the outcome of this war would determine Putin's political survival. So any outcome which is not subordination of Ukraine should logically lead to the collapse of the Russian regime. But at the very beginning of the Russian invasion in 2022, we have assumed that Ukraine cannot lose. Well, I know that not everybody wants Ukraine to win. We have that kind of politicians all over Ukraine. All over Europe, of course. But again, the very fact that Ukraine cannot lose means that Russia cannot achieve its strategic objective. So logically, that means that there is no other end game for us than actually collapse of the Putin's regime. If this is so, then our objective is to bring it about even quicker rather than longer. It is politically sensitive, but maybe it was not a coincidence when Joe Biden was in Warsaw and he said, for God's sake, this man cannot stay in power. If you remember Putin and Joe Biden. There was this story. Putin is always telling the story. When he was young, he was chasing a rat. He chased a rat, he cornered a rat lashed out at him, and he ran away home. And he is always saying he has learned a lesson, and the lesson is that you corner someone and he lashes out. And then people are telling, oh yes, that's the real story. Putin is a rat. Putin shall not be cornered because he will strike back. But this is complete nonsense. I mean, in this story, you have to take it literally. Putin is Putin. What it means? Putin is logical. Putin knows its limits, and Putin takes a step back when he is confronted by force. He was bitten by a rat, and he ran away home. That's actually the only lesson that we shall learn from his favorite story when he was young, and what he remembers from being young is that when he is confronted by force, he runs away. The problem is that he has not been yet confronted by force. He knows that perfectly well, and this is why he continues the war. 3 things that I want you to remember at the end of the story. Again, Russia is not winning Ukraine, and likely it will not win Ukraine. It doesn't mean that Ukraine will win this war automatically, and we have to do that. The third thing, the sad thing is, unfortunately, we have to be prepared that this may take much, much longer than we expected, but we have all the capabilities to do that, and we have all the capabilities to make sure that what Putin remembers is not only there, but what Putin remembers is that he has lost his teeth in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Good evening, guten Abend. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present and a bit advertise also the project, a teamwork and team effort of a group of international scholars which resulted in this publication, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and war crimes challenges for the documentation and prosecution of international crimes. And maybe I will book to the floor and to present it among such distinguished experts and to you. We have heard a lot about the future and question marks concerning the future of Ukraine and the consequences of the war. The project and questions we were exploring were asked 3 years ago and were focused not only on the future, but also on the past, on the history, on the roots of Russian aggression against Ukraine and historical patterns of Russian and Soviet imperialism and historical precedents of prosecuting international crimes and questions of effectiveness or ineffectiveness of those attempts, but also on the very important question of the present ongoing documentation works and different initiatives and projects focusing on victims' perspective, victims' needs, and their experiences of the war. So three pillars and 3 areas you were exploring: the history of Russian aggression, the ongoing efforts on documenting the Russian crimes, but also the question of accountability of effective and possible means to prosecute Russian perpetrators. By examining, yes? Okay. I'll try. The question about Soviet legacy and Ruski Mir was supposed to provide the historical and political context, depicting the causes and roots of current Russian aggression against Ukraine. The contributions, which you may read, show that the invasion was not an isolated event, but the latest phase of a long history of Soviet domination and violence in the region since the Second World War, or even before. Some experts analyze the ideological framing of Russian leaders and concepts of Ruski Mir and its role in justifying the criminal conduct of Russian politicians and soldiers. By exploring the Soviet legacy in today's Russian policy, it's important to reflect on the question of systemic impunity of crimes committed during the Soviet regime, before, after Second World War, and extent to which it has fostered a culture of impunity. And to what extent does it the conduct of Russian troops today? Among many unsettled Soviet crimes, the cases discussed in this book, few cases, among those cases, the example of Holodomor, of genocide, Russian genocide on Ukrainians, is discussed by 2 scholars and shows how important it is to trace the long history and continuity of Russian imperial policy towards subordinated nations, dehumanize their these societies. And this approach suggests that understanding the current war requires viewing it through the prism of transitional justice and remembering the crimes that are happening today have their roots in the past crimes of Soviet era. The comparative analysis of few historical cases or roots of this aggression give us also insights into how different post-communist states tried to approach the past crimes through legal proceedings, but also memory laws and politics of memory. We can see today, even from the speeches we heard, but still ongoing or visible divided memory between Eastern and Western Europe and European societies, different experiences and sensibilities towards past crimes, not only committed and experienced on the side of the Nazi perpetrators, but also from the Soviet side. States emerging from the Soviet bloc saw a moral and legal equivalence between Nazi and communist atrocities. Nonetheless, the demand for the Nuremberg for communism was never fulfilled. That's also important aspect to keep in mind when asking about the scale and roots and ideological background of the mass atrocities we are seeing today. The historical parallel include also an example we are discussing in detail, which was also mentioned today, the works of United Nations War Crimes Commission, which was the first international body established in 1943 by the Allied States in exile in London and devoted to the documentation of crimes committed by the Nazis by Axis states during the war, and which provided and developed a very big amount of account, but also conceptual framework for post-war prosecution. And next to this very systematic and structured approach, it also represented very important example of inclusion of smaller states, of victim states, into discussion about the post-war justice and paths for accountability. This example is compared in the book with ongoing and present efforts to document crimes in Ukraine. We present or discuss three examples of practitioners working in Ukraine and Poland and methodologies of working with war crimes evidence. What we see from this only selected examples is the importance of the works of civil society actors and the cooperation with prosecutors and authorities in pursuing the justice. And very important aspect of this work is not only the scope and access, direct access to victims through personal contacts or their own experiences, but also the sensitivity towards victims' needs and expectations, and also the trauma-centered approach, which is an area where the civil society sector can be very supportive for investigators and official bodies working with the huge amount of documents, of investigations, and get support in addressing the needs of victims and their in working through their experiences. And the third pillar of our book is and the third bunch of questions we have asked and analyzed in this project concerns what to do with all this material, how to effectively prosecute the perpetrators.
The negotiations concerning crime against humanity started, and the experience also from ongoing war is also of great importance in those negotiations. At the same time, you have negotiations in the International Law Commission concerning the immunities, whether we need to respect immunities in national jurisdiction. Once again, our experience from this war and the fact that we are unable to prosecute certain criminals is also used as argument in those discussions. So I would say that international law develops because of crisis, unfortunately. So the war in Ukraine also provoked many changes in national laws of various states and changes in the policy of various states. For example, many states were surprised that Poland opened its investigation based on the protective jurisdiction. We were arguing that we need to prosecute crime of aggression committed against Ukraine because this is crime also against our own security. While other states like Austria, like France, they used classic universal jurisdiction, but then they saw some limitations of this jurisdiction. And the experience of other states, like of Poland, was used by them to go further with the investigation. At the same time, we really struggled to have ongoing investigations and not only to support Ukraine, but really try to prosecute, to investigate crimes committed in Ukraine. And now we are changing our own law. We are also changing our own law because this is our preparation for the expansion of the war being more brutal. Yeah? So we have in mind the fact that we need to also legally prepare for any expansion of the war in Europe, for which we need to be prepared.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, nice. But just a short remark from your side. Like, do you mean that justice, transitional justice, is still possible in the time of warfare? So we can do it and should do it now, not after the war ends.
I am absolutely convinced that the work needs to be done now. Definitely concerning documentation of crimes. And this is also the lesson from the World War II, when the collecting evidence, collecting testimonies was undertaken from the very beginning of the World War II. So, for example, now the documentation is I understand the frustration that we are not able to prosecute certain criminals. However, the documentation which is collected is already used. For example, by register of damages. Now we have the agreement concerning claims commission. So all this documentation will also be used by this kind of body. The fact that we are sometimes frustrated how these investigations ongoing in Poland, in Germany, but also in Ukraine. And we try to also monitor this. Just a few days ago, we had the pleasure with Dominika to publish our interview with Nadia Volkova, who is presenting very bitter picture how the prosecution of crimes in Ukraine is ongoing. For example, the fact that the focus is on those who collaborate with Russia. Yeah, but we know that this works in that way because we have our own experience from the World War II and after World War II, when also national courts were primarily focused on the collaboration, not on the, I would say, primary war criminals. So I think that even in those efforts which are ongoing now, we can learn the lesson from the past, from the history, and try to at least improve a little bit. And yes, we will not be able to extradite some criminals, but to collect evidence, to document those crimes, to prepare legally for the prosecution. This is of enormous importance also for the victims. Many times I need to respond to the questions, do you really believe that Vladimir Putin will be prosecuted by the ICC? Well, I have doubts about this, whether this would be really possible. But I think that the mere issuance of arrest warrant, the fact that the ICC stated, well, the fact that he is involved in crimes is quite plausible. I think this also gives some sign, some maybe not very big one, but this gives us a hint of justice, yeah, that this person cannot safely travel wherever he wants, and that we make an effort. So don't expect spectacular results. Yeah, this is impossible during the war. During the war, we have also very many limitations concerning what can we collect, how can we collect the evidence. However, in our book also we presented that now we have tremendous opportunities to use digital evidence, and they are already used to analyze the situation. For example, about Bucha, crimes committed in Bucha, we could learn that those were crimes without any reason, that those were crimes committed against civilian population because of the digital evidence, because of the analysis of the satellite pictures. So I think that one thing is criminal justice, but another thing is state responsibility, civil responsibility, which we try to execute. Because if we do not document those crimes, on what basis we would talk about unfreezing the money which Russia has in Europe, and to use this money to rebuild Ukraine or to support military Ukraine? The fact that we document those crimes and we show what's going in the field is also used in those aspects.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I will jump then to Mr. Kiesewetter. Rodrigue, you have already told what Germany has still to do, but it was a tremendous jump, like from the beginning of full-scale invasion. Military support and the dependence of the Russia. Do you have also perspectives as ideas what Germany role in European defense can look like in the future?
Well, European defense is common defense, so we should see us as part and partner. Also, we should look to the different strengths and weaknesses. Our strength, I believe, is the economy and the ability to scale up from the automotive industry to the armaments industry. Our armaments industry is more or less a manufactural work. Iris-T, for example, is produced in a number which needs to scale up, and we could learn from automotive. But foremost, for Germany, it is to understand its role. Today, we believe we are the interface, the logistic hub, if there is a confrontation at the eastern flank. So we are preparing our harbors, our railway companies, and we are preparing hospitals and civil services for receiving refugees and wounded soldiers and personnel in general. But Russia will not wait for that. They would like to destroy this in advance, especially the logistic hubs. So in parallel, we could take over and learn from Ukraine how to protect civilian infrastructure by especially specific drone capabilities. To detect drones, to decide what is a civilian normal drone or what is an attack drone or which is a spy drone and so on. This all is possible that we have the capabilities. Then some neighbor states in the west of Germany are very reluctant to our armaments industry. They produce or they construct German-free supply chains because our export rules are very strict. Even if there is only a share of 5% German investment in an armaments good, the government must decide, and they do this 1 or 2 times a year. So there is a huge delay, and it is not calculable whether there is a leeway or not. So this has to be sped up, and the armaments industry on purpose is only manufactural due to this export limitations and the low request from Germany. So it's mindset, and it is also the willingness to co-finance other high-tech countries, and also to be ready to take over responsibility in air defense, so to finance European air defense and also long-range high-precision ammunition. Please allow me one sentence to these war crimes. In the late 90s, I worked in the Balkans with the International Court for Criminals for War Crimes of the former Yugoslavia. And it is so important to have forensic data. It is important for the court, but it is also important for the families concerned and also for the states getting ownership more and more in the region. And it is also, I believe, frustrating to know that the court might sentence people for 10, 12, 40 years. We have all experience in that. But if there is a good conduct, they could be released after 4, 5, 6 years. So the war criminals will be free earlier than we think. And therefore we have to prepare the societies how to cope with that. So we need also some reconciliation in this context, or ideas how to reconcile when they meet again. So they will return probably to their former home countries, or they will go where they come from, or they will be tracked. So how to cope with that, this is also an open question, and therefore the forensic work and all what you have said, and Professor Schübeck, all of that is so important also for thoughtful deliberations.
Dear panelists, thank you so much. I would like to ask you a last general question. Roderick, you can keep it. You will answer now. That's last question to all of you, and then I would like to give a floor to our guests that they can ask you a couple of questions. We've been talking today about 3 countries: Germany, Poland, and Ukraine, who are doing a lot right now for Ukrainian victory and for ending this Russian war of aggression. How do you think? What kind of cooperations should emerge, and what strategies we have to combine together as Ukraine, Poland, and Germany to be more successful and productive for the future?
Should I? Well, first of all, regarding the defense, comprehensive defense, not to have stovepiped national armies in the future, but to have comprehensive contributions to the European defense. I believe we have to overcome now, after the second horrible war in Europe after 1945, we have to overcome this national stovepiping. And this is a question of how much is a country willing and able to hand over national sovereignty to a trustful body. We have these European battle groups. I don't speak about a European army. This was very difficult with France and its history and some other countries. But to construct trustful, war-fit units on the brigade plus level, and for a strong integration of air defense, of cyber war, of drone wars, and of classic warfare integrated in this innovative. And second, to have much more meetings on the parliamentary level to convince parliamentarians, because they represent their population, that it is an added value if the parliaments control the armies, so that there is a vivid exchange and also a vivid control, but then also the insight and the belief in mutual trust and to overcome these deadlocks we had in the past.
Thank you very much, Dominika.
I can only agree to the very important and crucial conclusion for our goal for cooperation between these 3 countries. As a non-expert in this area, I will not develop any theory of the shape. Building upon what was said just before, I believe the recently undertaken efforts toward justice and this new awareness of its value, importance, but also the fact of participation in this process of civil society, it writes new chapter or builds new area for developing reconciliation praxis and reconciliation strategies. And I believe building up on the historical experiences of those 3 countries and also dealing with the past may be very important for the education and in general good neighborhood relationships, but also for the future, for maybe looking for good patterns for overcoming this very difficult, sometimes unbelievable tragedies and looking forward into the future.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yes, absolutely agree that the defense industry and integration of the defense industry is a must. Just take a look at the map, these are the three biggest countries in that part of Europe, the biggest countries with the three biggest defense budgets. So there's a lot of money to be spent, but we have to spend it wisely. And that requires coordination. Of course, coordination of the different, not only defense industries, but also defense planning. So what Ukraine is doing in Ukraine is creating strategic dilemmas, problems for Russia. And this is part of our own strategic planning as well. You have German brigade in Lithuania, which is part of it. If something happens there, God forbid, we plan it together with Ukraine. People say sometimes that when there's a ceasefire in Ukraine, Putin is like, chess master. He moves troops from Ukraine to the Baltic countries and he attacks the Baltic countries. And what would you expect, that Ukraine just stays there, sits there and does nothing? Surely not. So that's why we have to plan together, because this is creating strategic dilemmas, right? On the high north, in Ukraine, in any places. There is something that really deserves a credit that needs to be sort of underlined. I want to underline it, regardless of the country. So I'm just like, I'm always complaining that there's lack of this political will, etc. In Europe. I think it's important to name and shame people who do who do badly, who do bad things. But I also think it's important to name and give credit to those people who do the right things, especially the politicians who have the courage to tell the people what's the truth. And especially if this truth is uncomfortable. I travel to Ukraine all around, like every month, basically. And I rarely happen to meet politicians there, usually experts, but I was there in, I think it was December, no electricity, no water, snow, cold, winter. And I met one member of Bundestag there. It was Roderick Kiesewetter, and I think you deserve really credit for that you go there to see the things with your own eyes, and you have the courage to tell people the truth, which is uncomfortable truth, but it has to be told anyway.
Thank you very much. Patricia, do you also have a comment?
Yes, I need to say that when we talk about this triangle, Germany, Poland, and Ukraine, I think we need to remember that the relation between Poland and Germany are a perfect example that reconciliation, even after enormous crimes, is possible. And we need to learn from our experience. In 1945, nobody imagined in Poland that we could be an ally and we could be friends with Germany, while Germany is now the most important ally in many other areas, not only in case of the war with Ukraine. So I think that if this word reconciliation was mentioned by many times during our discussion, I think that the example of Poland and Germany is of particular importance here. And we know from our past that not always prosecution of all criminals is possible for different reasons. And that sometimes we cannot expect that justice will be provided in each and every case. However, what we know that the very important is truth and the joint discussion and the acknowledgement of what is going on, what has happened. So that's why I think we need to remember about this, that reconciliation must be possible, but reconciliation would not be possible without the truth. Which we would like to secure. And you already mentioned the problem with the fake news and how our societies are fragile if we talk about the disinformation. At the same time, we need to be we need to be honest towards us. We support each other. We are living next to each other, but I think it doesn't mean that we need to support everything at all time. If we want to commit to the rule-based order, we need to really have this attachment to those rules. So we support each other, but we also need to expect from each other that we do our best to not only rhetorically support rules of international law, but we also would apply those rules on the daily basis and in different forums. And sometimes I can really notice that we forget that we are in the one team and we compete with each other, which is always to our damage. So that's why I think this building the trust, but also building the trust based on the demands to apply rule-based order is of particular importance. And of course, in our case, we need to exchange experiences. This is extremely important. We know that Ukraine is now the most experienced state if we talk about the conduct of hostilities. And this is already ongoing. There are projects launched by Ukraine concerning better implementation of international humanitarian law, in which Polish, the German scholars are involved, and we can discuss together what to do better, not only for us, but for the whole development of international law. So the cooperation is possible. I see the will, I see the possibilities, and I think that we can be honest to ourselves, and also we can have some demands towards ourselves to just perform better.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you very much, dear panelists. Dear guests, I'll open the microphone for you. We will collect questions and then our speakers will answer them. So do you have any? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting. My question is, I've got a lot of questions. How do you, how can people defend a society in a world of post-heroism? This is important because if you look at the German situation and you believe in a way on the Poles, the young generation, the male young generation is not very interested in going to war in that sense, becoming a soldier. So the hero has gone. So how do you want to solve that problem? And furthermore, because Mrs. Merkel once stated the state of art of the German democracy as a market-conform democracy. You know, it's not a democracy that is based on general conscience of principle, as was once put by a German philosopher as Verfassungspatriotism or constitutional patriotism. That is, if you ask young people how many principles of the Constitution do you think are worthwhile to defend, they will close their lips. They don't have the slightest idea that living in a society in a frame that is given by the Constitution provides them with the essential part of freedom. This is one question. The other question, Mr. Kiesewetter, you wonderfully have stated the art of the German rail. And I came to the conclusion that it will take at least 10 years of a trench war to rebuild the German rail system in order to transport all the military goods to the front line. So how do you want to do that?
Thank you very much. A couple of more questions. Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Yulia Bedenko, professor of Kharkiv National University. And to be true, I'm really glad that I have the chance to listen to you. And I'm on my way from Harvard University to my home city, Kharkiv. So it was a unique opportunity, and thanks to organizers. And I would say I'm really much more inspired by your speeches comparing what I have heard or even being a speaker or attended the discussions in DC or at Harvard University, because they're really a mind shift among kind of political leadership in the United States, but also among like regular people there. So this discussion is really expertise-based, much more encouraging. But to be true, being affiliated with German institutions here in Berlin, like 3 years ago or 2 years ago, I also have a lot of inspiring words as a Ukrainian that it was a last wake call for, let's say, Europe. Then it was a Bucha, it was a Zoom, and then it was J.D. Vance's speech a year ago. And there was a lot of wake-up calls. I wouldn't ask you how many wake-up calls we should take to stop sleepwalking, but actually my question is also a bit kind of link of the previous one, taking the shifts in moods, in public moods here in Germany, then in Poland, previous elections result, current sociology. I would just like to ask you, how can we secure the even existence assistance to Ukraine from the politizations if the war will be a real long war? So how can we secure even what do we have? Or addressing Dominika and Patricia, how can we secure international law or these kind of processes that we already have for not being a hostage of, let's say, Polish populism or historical memory games? So how can we provide some security on the land here in Poland from not being manipulated by politicians, I would say, who are getting more and more popular? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? So the last one.
Last question. Thank you.
I guess my question is towards Mr. Kiesewetter. Excuse me. Sorry, they're talking. I tried to gather my thoughts again. Okay, there was this one phrase I tried to remember how you said it. It was in one phrase you mentioned a European NATO, which gave me hope, and then you said, well, perhaps sometime in the future, perhaps, but you put it like in the very far future, then Ukraine could join. So I wonder why on earth there's not more consideration of. I mean, of course, I'm aware of the enough said. I'm aware of the legal ramifications, Article 5, whatever. But yes, I would like you to expand on that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Roderick, question to you, and you can also elaborate on the other questions. We still have question about how to save the mood and secure support and law what we still have, and the way how to work with the next generations and motivate them to defend and stand for their countries. I can actually elaborate on that later. Have an idea.
Yeah, brilliant questions, and thank you for the opportunity to answer to your questions. It's really a great honor. Some 3 years ago, the Körber Foundation had an opinion poll amongst the 18 to 30 young people in Germany. And the question was, what would you do if Germany was attacked? And the answer was 10% to defend the country and 25% to leave the country. This has a little bit changed, about 20% now willing to defend the country. In Ukraine, 25% roughly have left of the male part of the war-fit population has left the country. So the same figure as in Germany. Why? Because these are civilian societies with the difference. Ukraine is a heroic society, Germany is a post-heroic society. But the Ukrainian soldiers or young men have not the opportunity to choose between civil service and military service. And Germany, and when I speak to my colleagues in the Rada, they say this was a missed chance and now it's nearly too late to prepare it. So in Germany, we should not accept that 25% of the youth is leaving the country or is going elsewhere. Also the elder one are looking for countries which of their interest in the Mediterranean or in the Atlantic or elsewhere. We should start with a mandatory service, not focused on military, but on civilian protection, on the whole question of disaster relief, of integration, of medical care and care in itself. Germany has about 800,000 young people in one crew, and we need about currently 20,000, but in the next years up to 60,000 as soldiers. But the other 4, 5, 600,000, they are not needed for the military and they should not leave the country. They should be employed in a mandatory service for the cohesion of the society. And this has to be prepared. And there I take up your argument. We talk about the young generation, but we don't talk with them. And when we started the debate about enhanced conscription, or at least enhanced military service, we didn't include at all the younger generations, the representatives of youth organizations, not at all. They claimed then to be part of this debate. So this was a mistake by default. And then we had a lottery instead of asking the people. We have overcome this lottery idea, but still we have not had a good exchange with the younger people. A post-heroic society, we have to convince the parents. Do they want to see their daughters and sons in the back room of a tank with a survivability rate of 5% if there is a war like in Ukraine with drones? No. So we need also technology which is enhancing survivability. So this is land drones, examples in Ukraine to find everywhere, and specific defense systems as well. So yes, talk with the young generation, but provide a post-heroic society with all technology which is fit and apt to survive. And then we can convince, but it's also a question of mindset. We talked about that. What also is, I believe, very important, the railroad system. Well, why have we so strange planifications for our personal trains? The main focus now is really carry loads, carriers and not personal carriers. So this to enhance will take until 2030, 2032, the so-called Germany plan. And then afterwards, the railroad system might be better in time for personal transport. But it is not communicated. Nobody is explaining why we are preferring or prioritizing the transport system and not the personal transport. As regards to the Madam Professor from Kharkiv, yes, I believe, and I'm not very optimist, in Germany the wake-up call will be a 9/11, a military 9/11. Otherwise we will not wake up. It will not be a society which will be thoughtful and learning. I'm very skeptical, but I'm called a warmonger from some journalists in our society. I'm not a warmonger. I would like to prevent us from war, but due to the fact that we are not learning from all these wake-up calls, we are used to wake-up calls. And this is also very important. We have in Germany the so-called Moscow connection, and they believe if we convince the Russians, then perhaps we need not to invest 500 billion euros in infrastructure or 1 billion euro in military defense. So this is also very much influenced by this long-lasting tradition of German-Russian cooperation. I'm fighting against this, and the number of those who are debunking that is increased. I take your question very serious about this European NATO or Ukraine to join European Union. I do not trust the United States any longer that they give this NATO a chance to be a transatlantic organization, except the European nations change to European nations and not to countries being also part of the European Union. These United States are not trustful regarding the EU because EU is a hub of regulation, and the tech firms of the United States want anything but no regulation. And we want this regulation for the sake of the freedom of our people and of their private sphere to be protected. So this is a big difference. And the speeches of Vance and Rubio show that we could join and jump on the bandwagon if we give up this cooperative model of the European Union. Therefore, I believe that Ukraine must become member of the European Union, which must be reformed. And if we are able then to develop a European NATO to revitalize Berlin Plus together with, especially with Turkey. We need Turkey as a part of a modern Europe and. But now you see, it is time consuming and we cannot afford this. Ukraine could participate in the European parliamentary elections by 29. Why not? Being observers in the European Parliament, and then between 29 plus 5 years, the next period, to make a membership possible. But this would be a signal and sign, and I plead to you all that you promulgate publicly, why shouldn't the Ukraine not be part in an observer, in an less observe and stronger participation status in the European Parliament as a significant step for more European membership.
Thank you very much. Dominika, would you like to elaborate? And maybe Patrycja then as well.
Yes, I believe you can counteract the manipulation, whether populist or other, only with facts and truth-based narrative, which is of course challenged to build one in that complex and threatened by disinformation, fake news environment, and on fragile topics, including the victimhood of this or other nation and this competition of victims or different claims that may appear and are used or misused by politicians or other circles. But still, I believe that the effort that we have observed and that is still ongoing and developing of recognizing situation of Ukraine, of Ukrainian society there, and the experience of Ukrainian refugees across the Europe, recognizing and documenting the crimes committed in Ukraine, and those multiple initiatives, networking groups, individuals, and really unofficial and or very good structured and organized initiatives devoted to the Ukrainian case, to supporting Ukrainian victims. It is a fact, and this documentation does exist, is secured, and not only by officials, not only by prosecutor offices, but as well but different organizations, scholars, journalists. And this amount of information, amount of experience to work with, whether only in this current context or in this much more demanding or maybe more challenging context of reconciliation and including historical misunderstandings. It is a challenge, but also great chance. And I believe there are so many professionals and already existing examples and also tools and skills that can be used, that I would be not very pessimistic about these attitudes. Patrycja, maybe you will follow up.
Yes, very good questions, and all of them very inspiring. The question about this post-heroic time and the post-heroic societies. I have an impression.
Yes.
I think we need to take into account that in many states we have these post-heroic times. Even in Ukraine, there was a need to prohibit young men to leave the country. You had the enforced conscription. The borders were sometimes closed. But at the same time, in Russia, you had also lines of people who wanted to get out from the state, to not be enlisted to the army. So this is the societies which we have now, and we need to deal with this. But at the same time, what was already stressed, we need to understand that nowadays war, they don't require mass of people to fight. What really counts, this is the technology. And what is quite surprising, that the line of the front looks very similar to this what we observed during the First World War. But now we are fighting with drones, with other robots. And what we observe that certain territories, certain parts of the territory are turned into the dead zone. This is what we need to deal. So I am not so afraid of the fact that we had these post-heroic times. And honestly speaking, as a scholar dealing with international humanitarian law, I don't want to have too many heroes. Yeah, I just wanted to have a law which is respected and also very well-prepared society, very well-prepared society to protect itself against the results of the hostilities. And I must say that we are not prepared for this. Yeah, we didn't do the lesson, and we are not prepared for the invasion which would happen. And I think this is quite sad that we are in 2026 and still people don't know what to do when the attack would take place. So this is, I think, on what we need to focus on: better protection and better education of our people, how to behave in the situation of the armed conflict. At the same time, I understand the question about this shift in the way of thinking in the US, also in other regions, and this is something which also we need to deal with it, and we need to understand that always there would be the situation when those states which are much closer to the conflict, they would be much more concerned with the situation. And that's why maybe we need to rethink with whom we trust, on whom we count in the armed conflict. At the same time, I think that we need to be prepared for the fight with disinformation. In Polish MFA, we have the special department, which is devoted only to the fight with disinformation. The fight with disinformation is also one of the priority of the United Nations, and there are many educational projects to fight with disinformation in different areas. Also, we could observe disinformation in the context of pandemic, and this works in the same way when we talk about the war. And the fight for the truth must be ongoing. Just to let you know, in December 2025, International Court of Justice accepted the possibility to submit counterclaims by Russia, and Russia in ICJ claims that yes, Ukraine is guilty of genocide. Yes, Ukraine committed genocide in Eastern territories, and that's why Ukraine had to protect those people. Of course, this is not true, but these are the claims which are made and which will be, and Russia would do everything possible to prove them in the court, which means that 4 years after the invasion, we still need to state what are the facts. And those facts, we would hear many lies about these facts, because this is also the way Russia and its allies, they try to build the coalition with other states. And sometimes we cannot also neglect one fact, that Russia, as the successor of the USSR, is perceived very well in some states, which remember that USSR supported the fight of various states with the colonial powers. And this is something which is very present in our discussion when we want to gain support in different votes in United Nations, and we always hear, what about colonial times? On what side you were? Or where were you in Iraq 2003? Unfortunately, Poland was in Iraq 2003 together with US, and we need to explain ourselves. We need to explain that what is our attitude nowadays. So this is ongoing process to fight with disinformation, to acknowledge the sins of the past, and to try to build together now better approach to the truth, to the international law, and to the respect. And concerning the European NATO, of course, it is needed. I would say maybe not the separate NATO, but the greater visibility, greater presence of European states in the NATO and in defense system. This is something I think many states understood, but not all, unfortunately. At the same time, when we talk about European Union, we need to understand that European Union is a certain space where certain rules must be implemented. And this is a long road to be accepted, not because we don't want to accept certain states, but because you need to be prepared to enter certain legal area to function together with other states. And Ukraine also needs to be prepared for the changes. We cannot give the entrance to the European Union without the effort, but this effort is made by Ukraine And once again, we can indicate on the cooperation between Germany, Ukraine, and Poland. We could hear from many ministers of Ukrainian government that they are really appreciate, for example, Polish experience of joining European Union and how we implemented certain regulations.
Dear
Now we
Patricia,
get tremendous.
I'm very sorry. We run a little bit out of time. Thank you so much for your comment. And the last comment from Daniel for today.
Very quickly, Julia, on your question, I'm afraid that's impossible. You can't just immune the assistance from the political cycles. You may limit the room for maneuver for politicians, but you can't codify political behavior, and this is political. Sorry for that. The second thing, when I came here to Berlin earlier this year, and at several sites, I saw the signs, it is forbidden to fly drones here. That means that you have young people who are playing with drones. These are potential soldiers. Possibly have to explain them that the war of today isn't really looking like the First World War, that you have, I don't know, several million people going there, just go ahead and shoot and take the rifle. This is a bit different story. It may be fun for them. I know it sounds controversial, but for people who play with technology, etc., it may be interesting for them. It depends how you frame it, right? This brings me to the question of talking to the society. I come from a very small village, very remote one in the southeastern Poland, and people believe that the whole Ukraine story is something which is relevant to the people in Warsaw in suits, white shirts, etc. It's not their business. You have to talk to the people also in the regions. This is something that we try to start in Poland. I think this is also important for Germany. And the third last thing, I do not feel very strongly about the moral arguments, but I know that the moral arguments are very important here in Germany, so I will make one. There is this story in the German debate that you owe Russia for the Second World War. Nope. Russia was a co-belligerent. Russia was a co-architect of the Second World War. Russia is not the Soviet Union. You owe nothing to Russia, and if you believe that you owe something to Russia, it wasn't Russia, it wasn't Russian part of the Soviet Union that had the highest rate of the casualties. It was actually Belarus and Ukraine within a part of the Soviet Union. So if you believe that you owe Russia, you actually owe Belarus and Ukraine.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, dear speakers. Dear guests, I'm sorry for overrun a little bit, but you really have to share and enjoy this information, please. There is QR codes with the publication and books, and there is book of Roderick Kiesewetter on the entrance. Read, enjoy. Thank you so much for standing in Ukraine and being interested in this topic, and great applause to Pilecki-Institut and our dear speakers. Thank you very much.